Good evening.
Hi everyone and welcome to Post-Digital Sucks. We'd like to start. My name is Sandra, these are Daniel and Azin. We initiated this event together and it originates from a course we're currently giving at the Guido Steyer class here at the University of the Arts. And we are very happy that we reached such a magnitude to this event. On Facebook we have more than 1,200 responses, so I guess this is kind of a serious seismic activity here that we're dealing with. So we definitely need to dig into this. And the question if we'll be DJing tonight is still open, as proposed by Paul on Facebook. And we're very happy to have here tonight Paul Feigelfeld and Florian Cramer. But before I continue with a couple of words about tonight's topic, I would like to pass on to Azin first to say a couple of words about the course and how it all came together.
Yeah, thank you. Also from my side, thanks for everyone to be here. My name is Azin Fezabadi. I'm a research fellow at the Hogeschool here at the WDK. And I'm a co-initiator of the workshop and course that Sandra mentioned. The title is On Projection, Historiography as an Aesthetic Practice. And we were lucky today also to have Florian Cramer and Paul Feigelfeld today with us the entire day. We had a marathon session. So it was very intense and very interesting for us especially, I hope also for you too. I just give you a short intro on the course and what the whole thing is actually about. We are already working with a group of students from the lens-based class since 4 or 5 months. And the discussion at large aims at redefining the practice of the historiographer and to look for an alternative form for historiography. One that is not objective nor subjective, but projective im Sinne von entwerfen, to design. One that takes time travel into account instead of merely foreseeing the past, instead of following the 3-act narrative structure of storytelling and the scientific historiography. So the discussions, the form of discussions that we have is subdivided in 3 key subjects where a transfer process takes place between the technical as complex system, the politicum within historiography, and the construction of meaning and knowledge through literature. This approach is like the attitude of the philosopher who assembles different scientific, linguistic, and also sometimes emotional contexts. Thereby, he or she produces new meanings in a way no other discipline is capable by itself. The fundament is a deep desire to experimentally externalize structures, matter, meaning, unify truth, and discourse through technical, medial, and narrative approaches. Like other researchers, filmmakers, artists, and writers that we have invited, among them Kamal Al-Jafari, Daniel Irgan, Farhad Fuzuni, Andrea Geyer, Alex Martinez-Rose, Professor Thomas Samkula, among others. We also have invited Paul Feigelfeld and Florian Cramer to respond to our questions and specifically to the series of works that are produced by the workshop participants, which, I'm finishing now, are going to be exhibited and screened in a program mid-May, and we are going to announce the date and specific details, informations about it soon. But we want to thank the Graduatenschule to support us with making this event happen. and also the lens-based class of Professor Peter Stein to co-facilitate with us the talk tonight. And I give over to my fellows.
A couple of words on the subjects before we finally proceed to the speakers. I started with seismic activity. I would like to continue from that. So we chose a provocative title, of course. We cut it off its original context, which is an essay from Florian Cramer entitled What is Post-Digital? Where only one of many aspects is that the term post-digital sucks, but is useful. An essay in which he looks at autonomous coinages of the term, discussing a popular culture which emerged and developed entirely on the internet. Now, we have to imagine that first. So he invites to look at a terminology in the sense of media archaeology, especially beyond academic contexts, in the just mentioned internet culture. So to me, methodological approaches to media, which also go beyond disciplinary boundaries in the direction of natural sciences, for example, like cartography, evolution theory, or history. And here I'm referring to my PhD topic and especially to Franco Moretti's distant reading, but I won't go into deep with that. Just wanted to say that such approaches mean a sensitivity for parallelism and bear a hope, at least to me, bear a hope for a progressive approach to theory which not only includes but is based on multiple dimensions. So, and these are very briefly said, at least my three main perspectives of interest, which I address here. Volcanic activity in terms of literature as a seismograph for cultural change, imagination in relation to calculus or literally phantasms made sense of as a notion of data, and maps to project that on. So now, why does this term post-digital have such power and is so tempting to use is only one question. If post-digital is related to art criticism, how to map it on media studies which emerge and develop entirely on the internet? And this is a question with which I would like to continue after the talks. So we would like to say a couple of words about the speakers and continue to the talks. Florian Cramer, who teaches in Rotterdam, is a director of Creating 10 at Hogeschool Rotterdam, which is an applied research center for creative industries in the Rotterdam region. He's also a former director of Piet Swart Institute, which is a center for postgraduate study and research of the Willem de Kooning Academy in Rotterdam. He studied comparative literature, art history, and German philosophy at the Free University in Berlin, at the University of Constance, and University of Massachusetts, at Amherst, and maybe for more details he would best say it for himself. Do you want to say a couple words about Paul?
Yes.
Yeah, hi from my side also. The next and the last speaker, or the second and the last speaker, is then Paul Feigelfeld. He's the academic coordinator at the Digital Cultures Research Lab in Leuphana University in Munich. He will talk about what it means that the internet has passed its teenage years. As he mentioned also in our intro, he will present a few non-linear anecdotes about cryptology, not as a symptom, but as a condition of possibility of its being. Cloud computing as a metaphor gone dark, the question of legislating the internet, as well as about what happened before. So in the notion of Sigrid Zielinski, who says we should not look for the old in the new, but for the new in the old, talking about media and technology, Paul will follow both Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Norbert Wiener, who learned about and from China. From his position, looking at the past, he will argue if our present is supposed to be post-internet, it is necessary to think about what lies ahead. So please welcome both speakers.
Thanks for being here. And let me start with that post-digital probably sucks, particularly in the context of a seminar on historiography, because if we're talking about nonlinear historiography, then anything with the prefix post is already problematic. That's number one. And the second problem is, I think that, maybe I'm guessing, but there are so many of you, perhaps not because of the term post-digital, but rather because of the term post-internet, which is very hot right now in the contemporary arts. And actually, what I want to do is not talk about post-digital, but I want to talk about this whole complex of terms called post-digital, post-internet, and post-media, which is a big mess. And I will try to untangle this mess a little bit. Actually, I didn't make this, I found this online. I think that all these terms, these three terms, post-media, post-digital, and post-internet, are confusing, and are confusing in two respects. Number one, what they actually refer to, which in many cases is totally different things, and how they each overlap or differ from each other. So what's the difference between post-media and post-internet, etc., etc. And I think that the troubles begin as early as with the first question. What do these terms actually refer to? Because very often one and the same term, such as post-media, is used to refer to vastly different, even opposite phenomena. Let's start with post-digital. This is a term that was actually coined 15 years ago, 2000, in the context of electronic music. And there in electronic music, it was actually really the kind of identificational term for glitch music. And it became a statement against the ideology of digital perfection. So electronic musicians who were fed up with the whole idea that progression of digital technology means perfection of sound production and sound reproduction, and said, no, we're not subscribing to that, we're post-digital. It's the same as if you're a filmmaker and you say, no, I don't care about 4K. Yeah? I don't buy into this permanent ideology of upgrades, and I downgrade. And then you get glitches. Now, if today we search this term post-digital in eFlux, then we get this. Histories of post-digital, 1960 and 1970s media art snapshots. I must say I have no idea why 1960s and 1970s art is post-digital when it was even pre-digital. And other, this is what I also found as a current announcement. It's in London, and I quote from the text of the curator. He says, it's about creating art in the digital age, so not in the post-digital age. And it also says that post-digital is also known as post-internet. Obviously, he refers to something else. So to anticipate a later part of this lecture, I think there has been an update of the term post-digital in 2012, and I've been guilty of that because it has been made in my research center by the publisher Alessandro Ludovico. He basically took the term from Kim Kooning and electronic glitch music and applied it to publishing and printing. He said, if you look at the whole history of publishing in the 20th and 21st century, we always have this prediction of the end of the Gutenberg galaxy and the taking over of electronic and digital of printing, and it has never happened. And this prediction has lasted for 100 years. So let's forget this whole kind of old media and new media dichotomy and think beyond that. So let's think post-digital. That was his proposal. Now, so it really signifies a critical revision of the concept new media, or even a break with this concept of new media versus old media. Post-internet, on the other hand, is a term coming from fine art, from contemporary visual art. It was coined by the German-American artist Marisa Olsen and subsequently popularized by the artist and blogger Jean McHugh, and then by the artist and essayist Artie Vierkant. It's just coincidental. You know, these terms were coined around similar periods, but really independently from each other. And if you read Jean McHugh, then his early blogs, then actually there is some overlap with post-digital. He says post-internet means we are now in the time where the internet is no longer exciting, and it's now the medium in which we pay our bills. But I think that in the meantime it has acquired a completely different meaning in the contemporary art system. Namely, it's about visual art that reflects an everyday visual culture shaped not to a small degree by the internet and social media. This here is a work by Katja Novitzkova, Post-Internet Survival Guide from 2010. And Novitzkova is one of the best known artists in this genre, I should say, of post-internet. That means it's really a fine art practice of producing objects that look good in exhibition spaces, but also look good in photographic reproductions online, have this kind of hybridity, but it's still, for the most part, it's installation art. And in other words, you could say that post-internet and fine art and contemporary art is rather an acknowledgement of new media, or it's finally contemporary art in its non-media art forms having arrived in the internet age than the opposite. So it's not about the internet is boring, but like I said, for the first time, we have, let's say, a mainstream contemporary art practice that is actually related to internet culture. So in that sense, you could even argue that post-internet and post-digital, although they sound the same, can mean exactly the opposite. Now, but things get even more complicated and messier, because as early as in 2001, the artist, designer, and media theorist Lev Manovich wrote a text called Post-Media Aesthetics. And in this text, he uses the terms post-media, post-internet, and post-digital completely interchangeably. And also with a completely different meanings than what I just mentioned, because for him they're basically synonyms with new media. He says, before the digital age, we had the old separated media such as radio, film, TV, etc. And they all have been left behind thanks to the computer, because the computer is replacing all the old media. So we live in a post-media conditions, yeah, in that historical sense. After digitalization has happened, so therefore post-digital, and after the internet changed all rules of the games, this is post-internet. And I must say, there is a similar text written a few years later by Peter Weibel who says almost the same. So again, we basically do not know what we're talking about when we're using these terms. Now, and it goes even further, because I think that the problem lies even deeper at the very root of the terms that they use, and that is in the word medium itself. Historically, medium has two different meanings and traditions that constantly get mixed up, and let me talk about this in a few minutes. Well, secondly, apart from that problem, from these two meanings of media, medium and media, these two words are Anglo-American terminology, and they simply do not exist in continental European philosophy, aesthetic and cultural theory prior to roughly the 1960s. So a colleague told me that in French you find the word medium for the first time in the 1965 edition of the Critique Robert, and that was directly after McLuhan's Understanding Media appeared in the French translation. For example, if you even look at work of theoreticians that are nowadays considered early media theoreticians, for example, Walter Benjamin with his works on the artwork in the age of its mechanical reproduction, or the critique of the culture industry by Adorno Horkheimer. You never find the word medium in those works. Same, by the way, with French and Russian structuralism roughly till the early 1970s. Simply didn't exist. Now, in Anglophone art criticism, the term medium has been used at least since the 18th century. What I show you here, and unfortunately it's a little bit small, this is from a 1746 English handbook called The Museum, or the Literary and Historical Registers. It's a kind of dictionary. And here an article speaks of the medium of painting. Yeah? So that means already more than or almost 300 years ago, that was a common term in English art criticism. I guess I'm not quite sure, because it's very hard to research because of the difficult history of translations. Actually, this comes from English translations of Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle's Poetics is let's say, one of the first major works that is, let's say, a making theory of art, not only of literature. And what I show you here is the most common English translation of Aristotle's Poetics, and he talks about the different genres of poetry, music of the flute, etc., etc. And he says they differ, however, from one another in three respects: the medium, the object. Yeah. The funny thing is if you look at the translations of Aristotle in other European languages, this word is not translated as medium. So here, this, for example, is a 16th century Latin translation that was like the canonical edition that everyone used. There you don't find that word, and you also don't find it in the French or the German translations, where they speak of moyen, or in German Mitte. So it means really means of expression, not medium. But if you fast forward, this is another example. I skipped it from my lecture. The Chinese written character as a medium for poetry. It's a legendary book of linguistics and Chinese linguistics written in the early 20th century, published by Ezra Pound. And there you see again this kind of Anglo-American notion of the medium as in the sense of a means of expression, artistic means of expression. And if you fast forward to Wikipedia, then we have here this article, only in the English Wikipedia, by the way, no equivalent in the other language editions, which says in the arts, the medium is a material used by an artist or designer to create a work. Well, this is really for people who are native English speakers. It's completely natural. So, for example, if you go to an English British Art Academy and you have a department of sculpture, a department of painting, a department of photography, these are the mediums. Yeah? That's the common English word. We're just not used to it in a continental European context. Let me fast forward then into the 20th century. This notion of medium as means of expression is also at the heart of the notion of modernist art that was propagated by the influential American art critic Clement Greenberg. And this is a notion or definition of modern art that remained canonical for many decades. I know that American art students still study that as a standard text in school. And Greenberg writes in 1960, it quickly emerged that the unique and proper area of competence of each art coincided with all that was unique in the nature of its medium. What he means is, for example, after in the modernist period, painting was no longer about representation, for example, about portraiture or landscape painting, but it became its own proper medium, a reflection of its own proper medium, that means painting. So again, if you think of this old division of the Art Academy, in modernism, according to Greenberg, painting becomes about painting, sculpture becomes is concerned about sculpture and no longer with something else, and that l'art pour l'art, you could say, and that's the definition of modern art. Now, and this concept was very closely linked to his own, I should say, propagation of abstract expressionist painting of the 1950s. Artists like Jackson Pollock and later Frank Stella. He had one student who later also became his detractor, and that was the art critic Rosalind Krauss, still a very influential contemporary art critic. And she wrote that Greenberg was perhaps the first to stabilize medium as the locus of discursive unity. So if you also think about the so-called intermedia and mixed media art of the 1960s, in the Fluxus movement, and happenings, etc., these were all referring to that Greenbergian notion of medium. Yeah? So we are mixing painting and we're mixing sculpture, so it's mixed media. This is not about McLuhan, it's not about media studies at all. It's about this art critical notion of medium. Rosalind Krauss then develops a concept of what she calls art in the age of the post-medium condition. And again, that refers to Greenberg. Her example is actually the art of Marcel Bothars, because for her, he's an artist who kind of transcends these boundaries of, let's say, art that is the proper reflection and recursion to its own medium. For example, in this Museum of the Eagles, where she writes an extensive essayistic reflection on. And this is in the essay Voyage to the North Sea, Art in the Post-Medium Condition. And so she writes then, at the conclusion of this essay, that video, when it arrived in the arts in the early 1970s, proclaimed the end of medium specificity. That means medium specificity in the sense of Greenberg. In the age of television, she writes, we inhabit the post-medium condition. Now this is perfectly counterintuitive if you come from media studies. You would say media art starts with video art. She says the opposite. Yeah? Video art was how we freed ourselves from the dictatorship of abstract painting. So it's the beginning of the post-medium condition in art. Now, I sketched one tradition of the term medium that most likely comes from Aristotle and then made its way through English art theory throughout the centuries till today. And the other one probably comes from Newton. This here is an edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, again from the 18th century, from 1797. And it's from the article medium. And it has, again, different definitions of medium, and one of them is the so-called subtile or ethereal medium. So Isaac Newton considers it probably that beside the particular aerial medium, so air, where we live and breathe, there's another more universal one, which he calls ethereal medium. And that was, let's say, the common assumption also for physics in the 19th centuries, that there is some kind of invisible substance called the ether that is in between things. And that the earth is kind of covered in this kind of substance of ether. And we have that notion of the ether, or the ether medium, still, for example, radio. Yeah? When we say in radio, we transmit something across the ether or over the ether. So in that sense, the modern media studies and communication studies notion of media really comes from that kind of physics, 18th, 19th century physics notion of the medium. And then was applied to telecommunications and to mass media. And became a common term in the early 20th century American creative industries and advertising, for example, and also in political propaganda, when you had a message that you wanted to get across, and you had to decide in which medium to put this message, such as newspaper, billboards, radio, later television. So, and just like the term of the artistic medium, which we covered before, this, let's say, more technical notion of the communication medium or the physical medium remained strongly Anglo-American throughout the whole first half of the 20th century. To my knowledge, the first, let's say, continental European critic who took it up was the film theorist Siegfried Krauthauer, who had emigrated to America during the Third Reich, and in his famous book From Caligari to Hitler wrote in the preface that it is necessary to analyze mass communication media. So it's perhaps the first example of someone coming from also, let's say, the outer fringes of the Frankfurt School, really literally taking up the notion of media. Now, in the 1990s, Felix Guattari, well known from his books he wrote together with Gilles Deleuze, wrote an essay, Post-Media. It was one of the very first, last essays that he wrote in his life. And it only consists of 4 short paragraphs. And he predicts, I think, in an almost prophetic manner, the convergence of television, telematics, and informatics. So he talks of the future post-media area that will be based on abandoning the hypnotism of mass media TV. So the idea is, for him, media are, let's say, the mass media, and post-media are the new media that will overcome the corporate, centralized big mass media. His vision is that these new post-media will be based on interactive use of information, communication, intelligence, art, and culture. So, and he even says, in the future, money, identity, social control will fall under the aegis of the smart card. I think that's quite a good prediction for 1990. And he even is prophetic in saying that there is a risk of this ending up as Big Brother technologies, but he remains optimistic that it does not necessarily lead to the power of Big Brother. Well, exactly this is not for debate, and maybe this exactly is also why we now have perhaps different notions of post-internet or post-media, that we also think about post-media, post-internet, post-digital has to do with this kind of more critical attitude towards these technologies. So what Guattari actually does is he writes a kind of mission statement for what then became the open source peer-to-peer and net art media activism of the 1990s and perhaps the first decade of the 2000s. But I think that there's a crucial difference with the American notion of new media that was also pushed by Emanovich, namely that his vision is not techno-determinist at all. It is not that these post-media he advocates are necessarily digital. What I'm showing here, Radio Alice, was a pirate radio station in Bologna in which got involved. And so you could say that both, let's say, peer-to-peer internet projects, but also underground press or pirate radio would fit his notion of post-media. So it's not a notion that cuts a divide between analog and digital. Well, we now have two notions of post-media or post-media, the one by Guattari and the one by Rosalind Krauss. The one by Rosalind Krauss was written a few years after Guattari, apparently without any reference to Guattari. And the two notions are completely unrelated. And it becomes even more confusing if I would cite Peter Weibel, who comes up again with a different notion of post-media. I will skip it here. I just want to drive everyone crazy. But in observing, let's say, all these kind of difficult histories and also these incompatibilities and strange overlaps, I'm drawing on another critic, the curator Domenico Quaranta, who already wrote 5 years ago in 2010 that aspects of new media overshadow another distinction that would be medium as an artistic medium and medium as a generic means of communication. It's exactly those two historical strands. He just links the one to Greenberg and the other to Marshall McLuhan, and I went a little bit farther and linked the one to Aristotle and the other one to Newton, but he makes the same decision. And therefore he says terms like media art, media specific, post-media era are highly confusing. They're constantly mixing up these two histories or these two notions of media. Now, what can we still say about post-internet and post-media? It becomes very hard to defend these terms. Perhaps we could say that post-media, both in the definition of Guattari and the definition of Krauss, still reflect a condition before the so-called digital information age. They were both written in the early 1990s and either reflect back on a previous definition of art or anticipate a new condition of communication media. Post-internet then is a decade at least further, and it's two things perhaps. It's if we think back at this installation piece by Katja Nowitzkova, it is post-medium art in this anti-Greenbergian sense of Rosalind Krauss. That means art that is no longer specific to a so-called artistic medium. So it is also not media art, it's not video art, it's not computer art, because I have seen that, I must say, at the school where I teach or where I'm affiliated to, the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam, we have two departments, a fine art department and a media department. And very often I heard from the students studying in the fine art department, well, I didn't want to inscribe into the media department because it's this old notion of the artistic medium that we wanted to get rid of. I have 5 minutes, so it's, and I'm already at my conclusion, so everything is all right. So actually, these confusions of these terms of media and media still exist, especially in the contemporary art context. And I think that in media theory, people are very often not aware of this kind of particular arts notion of medium and media. I wasn't before I came to an art school 10 years ago. Again, post-internet as art that is not medium-specific in the Greenbergian sense, but at the same time it's a product of an age where the internet has become the dominant mass medium for visual culture and reflects that in its own language and its own concept. Now post-digital. Frankly, I don't know how this term can be rescued or defended, given the whole mess that I just mapped out. Well, what I can say is, I think that, as Sandra said in her introduction, the title of this evening's lecture, Post-Digital Sucks, is only half of the story. The full quote is, "It sucks, but it's useful." I still think that it's a useful term. I have been confronted with it myself through my students, who at some point said, "Well, my practice is post-digital," because they came, for example, from electronic glitch music. I said, "Well, post-digital in these times," and then I got convinced by that point. I think it should be considered as something that is not post in a kind of linear historiographic sense, but rather as something like, for example, post-colonial. The post-colonial condition is not one where you say colonialism is over, but it has transformed. It persists in different ways. And the same is with post-digital. The so-called digital revolution happens. It's something that we no longer need to dispute, but it has transformed everything. And so the question is what is now happening, what are the configurations after that? I also like to refer to post-punk, because that's my generation, that's how I grew up in this city. Post-punk also didn't mean punk is over, right? You still can go to punk concerts, and I remember, I think the first time when I heard that punk was dead was in 1982, and it's simply not true. But still, there was post-punk as a kind of mutation, a changed condition of taking further that spirit of punk. And I think post-digital means something else, something similar. And what we really can see in many of these concepts of post-media as they're proposed by, let's say, new media theoreticians and practitioners like Manovich and Weigel, is this idea of the computer and the internet as the universal machine that replaces all media and sucks everything up and makes everything obsolete. And I would very much argue also, working with students in Rotterdam and now today in Berlin and seeing exactly the same, that this is simply not true. This is a kind of Hegelian vision of the media revolution that is really outmoded. So we're talking about a status quo, a condition after the disruption of media through digital technology, but also about phenomena, for example, that you can say the popularity of today's viral culture is a post-digital phenomenon in the sense that viral today is purely used as non-MP3. So viral has got a new definition. Or you could say, if probably there are people here doing analog photography, if you're doing that, then it's a kind of post-digital statement, because we're now living in a world where digital photography is the norm. 20 years ago, analog photography or vinyl records would not have been post-digital cultures. Today they are. So this is another example of how I think these conditions change. How this relates to post-internet art, I think you have to find it out. Maybe it's also a sign of the times that we live in this confusion, and post-internet might be, post-digital, post-media, might be rather signifiers of this confused state of affairs and culture that we currently live in and that we have to further develop. Thanks.
Thank you, Florian. It is a lot to follow up on. And I hope that while you make your best effort to disentangle out of the mess that we're in, I don't create more. Let me start by saying that I agree and disagree with what Florian just said, and we'll start with a postulate that I say that there is no post-digital. Or rather, while the story surely, or at least hopefully, goes on, we should make clear to ourselves that under the technological condition of today, a prefix like post does not only make very much sense, it inhibits feasible thinking and acting within this context. During a legendary cab ride that may or may not have taken place, Niklas Luhmann once said to Friedrich Kittler, "Friedrich, there is no such thing as the postmodern. There's only the modern postal system, die moderne Post." You see, there are infrastructures, there is waste, and what I want to demonstrate here tonight, there is no cloud. Or maybe it's said in words borrowed from the giant of Twin Peaks, the clouds are not what they seem. Let's start by looking at the infrastructures, the more or less stable and rigid structures underneath it all, and invisible to most of us, since even silly media theorists wanted to make us believe at some point that with the advent of the internet, mobile phones, or Wi-Fi, something might have become immaterial. Nothing, neither communication, media, or labor has become immaterial. On the contrary, material costs, rare earth, mineral mining, workforce waste, climatic effect, etc., everything is growing exponentially, while something very strange happens. Media become invisible and intangible. As our devices become more and more reduced to sheer, transparent, touchable interfaces, it is exactly this tangibility that makes them intangible. The seemingly intuitive approach to smart technology is doing the exact opposite. It prohibits access to the technology and inhibits knowledge and understanding. In the ability to use this technology, a toddler and a businessman do not differ at all. But this interface, which supposedly gives you access to the world at your fingertips, mainly does one thing. It keeps you away from the source code. It makes the mechanism intransparent while making you transparent to the companies and intelligence services. Contrary to what you might think, you do not own your technology. You void its warranty when you try to fix it yourself, and this does not only apply to your laptops and phones, but for example, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the US, it forbids you to inspect and repair the code that runs in your car. The internet is also not for free. You pay with your data in a quasi-religious indulgence of cybernetic capitalist accumulation. So slowly but surely, technology is becoming invisible. Soon it will just be a contact lens, an implant, a nanobot. This is a scenario of our lifetime. And while you may act outraged, you won't even notice, and you will want it. And at some point, your children will be born with what we might call hereditary technology. This movement towards invisibility is a convergence with what we call a black box. The trick being played here, however, is that we don't even wonder what's in the box anymore, because it's not the rabbit, it's the box itself that disappeared. Both the hardware and the software part of our reality emerge from something that has only recently entered the public mind: cryptology. Cryptology is not a symptom of information technology, but its condition of possibility. Encoding information, transmitting it through a channel with a certain aspect of noise, filtering it or protecting it against this noise, and decoding it on the other side is what media do. Long before Claude Edward Shannon formalized this in his 1948 book, The Mathematical Theory of Communication. While it is easy to trace back into our recent past of telegraph and telephone networks, as well as Alan Turing's World War II efforts of breaking the German Enigma cipher machine, let me point out that cryptology is as old as information itself. As soon as you have a system with which to encode information and meaning, say an alphabet, you scramble. I won't bore you this time with its mathematical and media history, but I might during the discussion if someone is up for it. Infrastructures, information channels have always been built by those in power. So it is tragic that even for a moment we thought that those in power do not control and monitor them. Infrastructures are made for that. Cryptology and the way you can and should use it may hide you, when you use public key cryptography or Tor, but it does not obscure. It makes the mechanism transparent and less cryptic. Two things, however, obscure this. Two metaphors that have become, that have started to govern how we think about the internet as a social, economic, political and legal sphere. Cloud computing and the darknet. The funny thing is that each means the entire opposite of what its name says. The term cloud computing is most probably a result of the sloppiness of computer scientists when it comes to PowerPoint presentations. And as a former student of computer science, I can confirm that. Popular lore has it that the term actually really does originate from the visualization of clusters of computers on slides with the prefigured cloud design available in PowerPoint. In the recent years, marketing and political campaigns have modeled this into a metaphor of ubiquitousness, of something fluffy, ephemeral and celestial, light blue, almost transcendent. The cloud, however, is at all. It is the actual open space of the internet. It is where you can determine yourself what you want to see, #no filter. Because this also means that any kind of shenanigans can be done there, the question of regulation and deregulation is of course a factor. However, the internet as a realm of law is approximately in the same state supranational, international waters were 2 centuries ago, and again the same metaphors, pirates mostly, are at play for better or worse. Digital rights allow and demand a completely new consideration of how law and space relate to each other. It is due to a structural problem of technological modification and an understanding of law that lets open sources seep into black boxes that digital rights only entered the public consciousness after the revelations of WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden. Outrage that intelligence services, who, as we have seen, significantly co-developed our information systems architecture, collect and use our data, is evidence of a certain immaturity. In a time in which digital media permanently co-determine every aspect of our lives, and we continue to do so to a greater extent, such immaturity counts as one of the central problems of our society altogether. Digital rights not only means that the private sphere of informational self-determination, as well as the copyright of producers and businesses, shall be protected. That is, it's not only the limits of law that should be respected, but first and foremost its openness. Governments turn into businesses, and businesses into governments, which effectively implement legislatures, or at least try, as in the case of SOPA and FIPA and ACTA. And in contrast, these procedures cost activists either their freedom of movement or, in the case of Aaron Swartz, their lives. Rihanna's statement to digital rights just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's called "Bitch Better Have My Money." How nations and supranational information and architecture are related to each other is far from clear. We are moving in a space that still leagues away from guaranteeing any fundamental security and freedom across national borders. Security here, more than anywhere else, means freedom from regulation. The question is whether the internet will ever be the kind of space that the cyberpunks of the 1990s imagined. This media ecology requires a radically different economic and political practice in order to counteract the colonization of the internet, which for a long time has not been taking place outside or beyond our world. And something else that is just starting to come into play is full-blown cyber warfare. With the advent of so-called D-weapons, D as in digital, following the ABC of the 20th century, atomic, biological, chemical, it becomes clear that there is no international convention whatsoever for this kind of warfare yet. This is especially problematic under the cryptographic aspect, since one central character trait of these weapons is concealing that they exist and concealing of faking their origin. Infrastructures attacking infrastructures, electricity grids, power plants, the internet itself. A worm like Stuxnet, you might have heard of it, was wreaking havoc undetected for a long time until someone for the first time realized that it was actually there. The just recently discovered and apparently almost omnipotent hackers of the so-called Equation group were quietly working for 14 years. It is funny to note that how they got discovered and possibly tied to the NSA. Some hidden timestamps stored in the Equation group malware showed that members overwhelmingly worked Monday through Friday and almost never on Saturdays and Sundays. The hours in the timestamps appear to show members working regular workdays, an indication that they were part of an organized software development team. Assuming they worked a regular 8 to 5 workday, the timestamps show that the employees were likely in the UTC and UTC-4 time zone, a finding that would be consistent with people working in the eastern part of the US. All this is, after all, just bureaucracy. This is all, as I hope I could demonstrate, just the beginning, and why the NSA is surely the big player here. It has also diverted attention from what we were all talking about before we were talking about the NSA. That is China and its invisible army of hackers and the great Chinese firewall. It is a little known fact that the original term information warfare was coined in a white paper by a young officer in the Signal Corps of the People's Liberation Army of China named Chen Weiguang in, of course, 1984. Before I stop, I want to tell you 2 more short stories. It so happens that China played a significant role in the establishment of the techno scene in the past, starting not in 19 but 1584, when Jesuit missionaries arrived in China and, because of the lack of Chinese interest in Christianity, started a scientific exchange between East and West that informed the scientific developments and of the blooming Baroque of the 17th century in lasting ways. Apart from cultural techniques and religion, it understandably so was the Chinese writing system that most fascinated the alphabetic culture of the West. The 17th century can be seen as giving birth to, among many other things, the idea of computability. This is partly due to the sudden phenomenon of what we might call Baroque big data, because with the new mathematical tools like Newton and Leibniz's calculus for astronomy and every other kind of natural phenomena, as well as the rapid exploration of large parts of the world previously unknown, including China, and newly established faster and more effective information networks, the amount of knowledge to be dealt with prompted many thinkers to try and develop universal languages, rational languages that could already convey ideas rather than just meaning, as well as devices to make tedious calculation by hand obsolete. After all, scientific and technological invention and progress very often is a very direct result of laziness. So the Chinese, some thought, might already have such a universal language and writing system. This led to a lot of speculation and to few or no direct results. What it did, however, was prompt someone like Leibniz to probe in a very analytic way what symbolic systems can and cannot do, what can be encoded, encrypted, and computed, and where the limits of this could be. Leibniz can be read as the first media thinker. While his mathematical work builds the foundation for today's computing machinery, and his engineering work contributed greatly to the idea of mechanization, processes of calculation, and ultimately thought, he was also perhaps the first thinker of the postal system and of the network. For Leibniz, thinking meant sketching and distributing. Instead of just sitting in his chamber and writing books, Leibniz sent out thousands of letters to his personal network spanning the whole globe with over 1,200 nodes reaching as far as Beijing. At the same time, the academy system begins to free academic knowledge from church and court. Being in a network becomes a defining dispositive of knowledge production. Leibniz's way of incorporating Chinese knowledge into his system makes him the first truly international thinker. He can, without exaggeration, be said to be substantially influenced by Chinese knowledge on almost all his levels of endeavor. Even when Leibniz invents the binary notation for numbers, China plays a big role. Leibniz invented it but didn't know what to do with it. Representing numbers with 0 and 1 was a great mental exercise for him, but it didn't have any application. So Leibniz did what he always did and sent out a couple of letters. A while later he received a response from a Jesuit in Beijing, informing him that his zeros and ones and the construction principle was absolutely conforming with the construction of the tri and hexagrams of the I Ching, the Book of Changes. And those trigrams, it is said, they are the original 8 characters of the Chinese writing system, invented some 7,000 years ago. This is what prompted Leibniz to actually finally publish his theory of binary numbers at the very core of information technology today. In Leibniz's world, Descartes' mechanistic world, however, is a thing of the past. In his living network, he is the thinker of ecologies and organicism. We witness the world changing from a necessary theodicy, which justifies the existence of God and evil in the world, to that of what we might call a techno-positivism, the description of an all-encompassing machine made up of organic parts. The language it is written in for Leibniz is Chinese. Its characters are monads, the language, its environment, its grammar, and ecology without nature. Practicing science means creating art. A few centuries later, in the early 1930s, when Alan Turing is starting to create the Cathedral of Computability on Leibniz's foundation, Norbert Wiener, whom you might know as the father of cybernetics, moves to Beijing to start to teach engineering and mathematics and study the Chinese language and philosophy. Before him, John Dewey, Bertrand Russell, Alfred North Whitehead, and Albert Einstein traveled to China and gave lectures. Russell's interpreter during his journeys, a young mathematician and linguist named Charian Ren, would later also befriend Wiener and contribute greatly to the foundation of cybernetics during the Macy conferences in the early 1950s. He is also responsible for the first Chinese translation of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which became such a big hit in China that it spawned China-exclusive sequels such as Alice's Adventures in China. Because what comes after Wonderland is even weirder. Norbert Wiener and his Chinese colleague Yuqing Li built electrical networks and analog computers while in China. But at the same time, with Wiener being exposed to the Chinese language and philosophies of Neo-Confucianism and Taoism, philosophies of the organic and the process, it is safe to say that very early ideas for cybernetics, with its very special approach to environments and organomachinic feedback processes, came into being in China. I went through large parts of Norbert Wiener's archive at the MIT a while ago, dreaming, as you can imagine, of hand-sketched circuits and networks mingling with Chinese writing practice, gradually merging into each other, but I couldn't find any. I keep looking. As you can see, I only used the word post-digital once in the first sentence. In order to understand what is going on and to figure out how theory and practice, be it in art, science, or historiography, and so on, constellate the nature of this culture we live in, we might have to look into rare earth, oceans, and space, and consider converging forces in our discussion that we hopefully have now. Thank you.